Welcome to Protected Presence USA, the podcast, a podcast that offers English listeners a window into the Protected Presence movement and the reality in the West Bank that makes that activism necessary. Four of us co-host this podcast together: Moishe Alfonso, Mitch Abador, Amit Orfali, and me, Celeste Marcus. On this episode of the podcast, our very first one, we welcome one another and you, our listeners, to this project. We introduce ourselves, explain why it is that we do the activism that we do, and share a story about our time in the West Bank.
Hey everybody, my name is Moishe Alfonso. I am originally from Memphis, Tennessee. I'm now living in New York City. And I first started doing Protected Presence because I participated in a 4-month program called Achvat Amim, Solidarity of Nations. I went to the Israel-Palestine last September, and I came back this January. And I didn't even know what Protected Presence was. They were just like, this is one of the options of something you can do. You go, you with Palestinian herders and you take pictures and, record things. And immediately I was like, yes, I want to do that. I want to see what this is like, because one of the main reasons that I wanted to go to Israel-Palestine because I'd never been before. I'd never, and I had very strong feelings about Palestinian human rights and what was going on over there. But I felt like I needed that in-person experience to even though all the arguments are valid without having to actually be there, I wanted to see it for myself to be able to come back and tell what I saw. And yeah, I did Protected Presence mainly in the Eastern Mala region, mainly with the organization called Torah Tzedek. And it completely changed my life. Like, that was one of the best experiences I ever had.
Moishe, since you're going first, Can you tell listeners what Protected Presence is? Since we're just going to assume, I think, that they don't know. And I'm also curious to hear how Achvat Amim defined it for you guys before you actually did it.
Sure. I'd be happy to. Sure. Protected Presence, this is when either Israelis or internationals, Jewish, non-Jewish, when they go to communities, mainly in the West Bank, who are facing harassment, intimidation, violence from settlers, from Jewish terrorists. And so these communities ask certain organizations, certain people, if they can come and stay with them. So usually, you have maybe 2-4 people during the day who stay, and then maybe 2 people that stay at night. And it's a 24-hour presence there. And the idea is that when settlers come and there are non-Palestinians there, we're there always with our cameras recording. We put ourselves between the Palestinians and the settlers, and the idea is to somehow diminish the violence or diminish, the harassment, which it doesn't always work that way, but that's the intention, is that you're showing solidarity. And it's also showing solidarity with Palestinians, that people are there, they care about them, that we are there to support them in whatever they need at that time. And Achvat Amim, we did with Achvat Amim, we did an orientation with, I believe it was Rabbis for Human Rights. Yes, Rabbis for Human Rights, a wonderful organization. And we went to Masafer Yatta, which is a pretty famous place in south of Hebron. And they gave us training, what to do, what not to do, always stay together, don't ever separate, things like that. And then they put us in contact with different organizations such as Torah Tzedek, which is run by Rabbi Adik Asherman. And then it was everybody's choice what they want to do. There were some people, for example, there was a guy named Kai, and he would take people 2 times a week to Al-Fadasiyah, which was in the northern Jordan Valley. And so you have to like organize rides. Like, that's the whole point. Like, you have to there's a table, and you have to sign in on the Excel sheet when you're free and when you need a ride, when you need to get back. And so that's how I got into it. And I did it first. I think the first time, I don't know, you build, what's the word I'm looking for? A closeness, like you become an affection for the people, the Palestinians. And that was my case. Like, I started going with Torah Tzedek to places like Muhmas Bedouin, Duma, and you spend time with these people. You sleep with them. You're with them 24/7. And you even though I did protective presence with several different organizations, I ended up focusing mainly with Torah Tzedek in the Eastern Mala region. And I mean, I have a lot of stories. There are two very sweet ones. I'll start with the sweet ones. One was when it was Hanukkah, which is the 8-day festival, Jewish festival, where we light candles. And we were in Muhmas. I was there with Rabbi Arik Asherman, and we lit candles with the Bedouins, and we sang, Hanukkah songs, and I thought that was very sweet that we were able to do that. I mean, the Palestinians weren't participating, but it was nice for them to see, and they had no problem with it. I thought it was a very interesting experience to be in a shack in, in the middle of the West Bank with Palestinians laying on mattresses to the side. We were three of us there singing Hanukkah songs. That was quite interesting. And I have to say that one of the most touching moments was when I rarely saw kids in the West Bank, because by the time that we get to the communities, when these communities ask us to come and help them, it is the violence has usually gotten so much that they've had to send all the women and the children away. So it's mostly men in the places that I've been. This was months ago; things have changed, but it was mostly men. So one day when we were in Duma, this whole huge bunch of kids came, and it was just like a party. Like they made tea, and they made us hot tea, and it was this a guy that I know, Max. He had stickers, and he gave all the kids stickers, and they put stickers everywhere, and it was just a lovely time to spend with there's one of the wives was there, and so I'd say that was a very beautiful experience. Unfortunately, a sad part of that story is that all these children have since been displaced permanently after I left Israel Palestine in January. Several months afterwards, they were given a closed military zone order, so all activists had to leave the area, and settlers came in and destroyed all the homes, and 11 families were displaced. And so these kids no longer live in that place where I have these lovely memories, which is quite tragic.
Thank you. Mitchell, you want to go next?
Sure. Okay, so I'm Mitch Abador, and I'm considerably older than everybody else here. So I'm here as a representative of a generation, actually a couple generations beyond my colleagues, my comrades here. So I'm 74 years old. I've been demonstrating one thing or another since my first demonstration was 1967. It wasn't the 6-Day War, it was the Vietnam War, but I've been out at this a long, long time. And the reason that I ended up going to Israel and then to the West Bank to do protective presence, there's like an ideological reason, and then there's just a personal activist type reason. So, intellectually, it's, as a way I like to put it, is it was a combination of Kant and Marx. That I just felt there was a categorical imperative. This was something that had to be done. It was morally right. And if the whole world did what I did, as in almost every case, if everybody did what I did, it would be a better world. But also,
I believe you.
And right, thank you. But then there's also something that that Celeste and I did a talk a little while ago with a Marxist education group, and I convinced them to have us on by quoting Marx's 9th thesis on Feuerbach, which is, up until now, philosophers have only interpreted the world. The thing, however, is to change it. And so it was like enough, and that was really kind of what had happened to me. It's like one thing, it's not enough to just sit around and whine and kvetch and complain and moan. As long as you're physically able to do something, then you should just do it. And so for me, it started first with going out campaigning for Zoran. And I went out, and it was something I absolutely fucking hate doing. I hate knocking on doors. I don't particularly like talking to strangers. But it was precisely because I hated doing it that I had to do it. Because there's nothing meritorious about doing what you like. I mean, I watch film, every day. I read every day. I don't expect anybody to congratulate me for it. But doing what you hate for a good cause, there's something to be said for it. So in the middle of doing all this Zoraning, in Haaretz every day there was all the accounts of all the terrible stuff that was being done to settlers. And Celeste, you might have to help me with this.
Avner Gvaryahu.
Right. Avner Gvaryahu wrote an opinion piece, thank you, in Haaretz. That's why we're a good team. And it said it's not enough to support us from afar, those of us who do, the Israelis who do protect the present. You should all come here and do it. So I have to just point out here that I'm legally blind. I have one functioning coronary artery. I have arthritic knees, and I'm just generally a wreck. But it didn't matter. If I could go out and do the things that I want to do, then I should be able to do this. And so it took a whole lot of work. And this is like a really important part of the protective presence story. So I decided I was going to do it, despite the risks and despite everything. And I told my wife, who was not really anxious about being a young widow. So, but she recognized that this was something I just had to do. It really was not a matter of choice. I just had to do it. I had to do it. And I have to be clear, I went to Israel in 1974. I spent 6 months on Kibbutz HaZorah. I was going to stay there. And then I decided, no, I cannot do this. I hate this country and everything it represents. I cannot move from a country I hate to a country I hate even more. So anyway, Celeste and I got in touch with each other, and we decided that we would find an organization to go over with, to go to the West Bank with. And it turned out not to be a very easy process. It was, in fact, an extremely time-consuming, cumbersome, and unpleasant process, which led us to set up this organization. But anyway, we finally decided we would go over with Jordan Valley activists. And although Celeste spent time with another group, and she'll talk about that. So I went over to work with the Jordan Valley activists. And so they warned me that my ambitious plan of doing this like every other day for a few weeks was just not going to work, that it would just physically, it would just wear me out, kill me, shouldn't do it. But I did go enough times. Well, let's just put it this way. Every single time I went out, something terrible happened. And so I'll start though, and the first time that I went out, we were just supposed to be getting a tour of the areas of the towns the Jordan Valley activists cover. And so it was supposed to be like a 4-hour tour, like Gilligan's Island. It was going to be like Gilligan's Island. We just got and so we met with a Palestinian, and then we went out. He wanted to show us what he'd been telling us about how the attacks and his land was being torn up and his hoses were being cut. And sure enough, as soon as we got out in the field, there we were, surrounded by crazed settlers. And it was like minutes, and it was 10 minutes after going out, there we were, experiencing exactly what we had, in a sense, what we'd gone out for, and we got a chance to just, to test ourselves. And I have to admit, it was a really scary thing, because we saw that one of the settlers had a gun tucked into the back of his pants, and then the army came, and foolish American that I am, for a brief moment, I said, well, the army's here. Everything's going to be okay.
They called the army.
And also I said, wait a second, this is the same army that's just in the middle of committing genocide. So like, what the hell am I thinking? What good are they? And sure enough, they hated us to death. Absolutely fucking hated us. And so I really got a taste, on my first day, in my first minutes, of everything, the truth of everything that you read. And in fact, that those out there who listening to this, who read about what goes on in the West Bank, as bad as it sounds, it's actually a good deal worse. But what also was really important was everywhere we went, the Palestinians were so happy to see us and so grateful for us and couldn't do for enough of us. And people living in like abject poverty, but they were always hosting us. It was always tea or coffee. Matter of fact, there was one day, and this will be the end of my story. So I have the story about being beaten, but we went to a village all the way out in Yenavelt. It was like out in the middle of nowhere. And we went there because there was nothing going on in the village. It was our base. Now, of course, as soon as we got to Yenavelt, we got a call. Now the settlers have attacked where we left. But what happened was, so we're in this village in the middle of nowhere with this lunar landscape, and we'd already visited 4 other villages where we'd gotten tea and sometimes pastry in every one of them. It's now like 4:30, 5 o'clock. We've been out since 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like ready to explode from all the tea and coffee. But I can't so I don't know how to but the hospitality is so important, to the Palestinians. It's such an important part of their culture. So that I did the only thing I could do. I didn't get out of the car. And so what happened was the oldest son came out with my tea and my baklava. And so I couldn't escape it even then. But at any rate, so in summary, finally, I want to say that, like I said, I've been bazillion demonstrations for you name the cause. I've been out there marching against it or for it, usually against. But the couple of weeks that I spent doing this is more important than everything else that I ever did. That everything pales in comparison to going out and doing Protective Presence. And I'm really looking forward to going out and do it again, and hope that people out there listening will join us. So there you go.
All right, Amit, you're up.
Well, that
Thank
was
you, Mitch.
great to hear you both, Mitch and Moishe. I just want to clarify, first of all, that I'm an Israeli, unlike three of you, born and raised, and I also live in a country I hate, and that's the reason I do Protective Presence. And I also started with demonstrations like you. I'm a 19 years old conscientious objector. I just got my exemption from the Israeli army last year. I refused to serve because of the ongoing genocide, occupation, and all the other crimes Israel commits. And I was ready to go to prison for that, although I didn't. I wasn't sentenced. I was exempt. And after doing years of activism in Israel, with direct actions and protests and a lot of community political events that I organized in my hometown of Givatayim, a suburb of Tel Aviv, a friend convinced me to join Protective Presence in the West Bank. That was in January, and since have been going way too much for my own taste, a few times a week regularly. It consumed my life because since the moment I started, I couldn't stop. I had the moral obligation to keep going to those communities, help them, show solidarity. And in my opinion, Protective Presence is a story of privilege. I live in an apartheid state where those Palestinians that I visit cannot visit me in my home. They don't have the same rights as me. If they get shot, it won't make the news because it happens every day. It happens all the time. If they get injured, if they are displaced, no one will care in Israel, or at least not people in power. And it is my duty as someone with universal human rights, an ideology that has universal human rights in its core. It's an obligation and a duty to come to these communities and show solidarity. I volunteer with Torah Tzedek, like Moishe, and Rabbi Arik Asherman always brings up the story of the Holocaust. And he says that the solidarity aspect is so important in that would you imagine how much it would mean for Jews during the Holocaust that someone non-Jewish would stand up to them, would tell them, I'm with you, you're not alone, not every single German is your enemy, there are also Germans who care about you, who think that your life is worth it, who are willing to come and protect you with their bodies and put themselves in risk and in harm's way. That would mean the world, and there were Germans who have done that, and they should be cherished. And that's our job today, to be those people who stand up, who resist, who show solidarity, and use our privilege to protect those people that no one else protects. And I think that my stories from Protective Presence are all about this point of privilege, how we use our privileges as internationals, as Israelis, as non-Palestinians, in order to protect those Palestinians, in order to protect those communities. But first of all, I want to start with the children that Moishele mentioned from Duma. I've been there on the day that they were displaced. I was with my friend and activist Roni. We were sitting in a lookout, and we saw people running. We didn't know if those were settlers initially. They were running away from their homes. Then we realized there were dozens of them, and we saw them with bags and mattresses. Those people were the Palestinians, including children, who were running away from their homes for the last time. Because for the entire day, and I think it was 3 days, settlers laid siege to their community. They came there with their ATV, harassed, intimidated. They weren't scared to use violence against activists and Palestinians. And eventually the Palestinians decided to leave. They were expelled, forcefully expelled. And this was all in complete coordination between the settlers and the army. And I think that's the first thing you see as a protective presence activist, the link between those settlers and the Israeli authorities. Because for months we've been protecting this community. With our bodies, our activists were attacked. They were sleeping there nights and days, like Moishele said, and like he experienced. But the second the army issued a decree of closed military zone, expelling the activists, but not enforcing the same order on the settlers, they were done. The settlers were able to rage on their attacks, and we were hopelessly sitting there in the lookout and seeing those people running away from their homes with barely nothing in their hands. That was a very traumatic situation for me to see that. It's an image I won't forget. That was my first community that was displaced. Well, hopefully the last, but I'm not so optimistic. And I think that shows that protective presence really has an effect beyond solidarity. Although the aspect of solidarity is very important, we actually protect those communities. We help them stay where they live, and we help them deal with those settler attacks. Because until we were expelled from the area by the army, for months, the Palestinians were able to keep living in their homes. And the moment we were expelled, the moment the army decided it was over, then the community was displaced. And another story on this exact same point, a very short one. It was a month after that event. That happened on March 5th. The Duma community was expelled on March 5th. And in April, I was again with Ronnie, and we were called to a concrete factory in the Christian town of Taibe. Now, it was the first time I've been to Taibe and the first time I've been to a concrete factory. And I found dozens of men, working in a concrete factory, but locked in their office. They haven't worked. They haven't been able to go outside and run the factory for 3 days because they were scared of settlers coming, harassing them, taking pictures of them, telling them, this is not your land. You have to leave. You'll eventually leave. That's what the settlers said. And when I, 19 years old, fairly small man, and Ronnie, a pensioner in her 70s, came to a concrete factory, that's when they started working. That was astonishing to me. That two people, not very intimidating, not very strong, but just very privileged, made a concrete factory work. And that could be anyone. That could be anyone that is not a Palestinian, and that should be more people coming and doing exactly that.
Thank you. I'm Celeste Marcus. I'm from Philadelphia. I was raised in a modern Orthodox, very far-right Zionist family in the States. I spent a lot of time going over to Israel growing up. 2 of my siblings elected from America to go to the IDF. And I decided, so I did protective presence for the first time several months before Mitch and I got in touch. I didn't do it with an organization because I couldn't figure out how to. Because my Hebrew is pretty good. I have a lot of Israeli friends on the left because growing up in the community that I grew up in, and especially in the family that I grew up in, which is very, very close with very far-right, powerful organizations in Israel, the hatred for Palestinians was quite naked to me from a very young age. I saw it very clearly. And even when, like, from a very young age, I had developed a very intense connection to Israel and really a love of the people and the culture, which I still have, that hatred was disturbing to me. And when, like every other Jew on the planet, October 7th was an altering experience for me from the comfort of Washington, D.C. It really, like, that day, my life changed completely after that. And watching the genocide in Gaza happen was just made sense in the context of the hatred that I had witnessed already. So, I mean, I think I get kind of, I find it jarring when people say they knew that there was going to be a genocide, because I think that it should be shocking, even if you could have thought you knew that it was going to happen. Seeing it happen is really altering. It should be altering. You shouldn't, like, sound jaded about it. And I certainly, even knowing all the things I knew about the way that certain kinds of Jews and certain kinds of Israelis talked about Palestinians, I could not believe what I saw every day. And I could not believe the hard-heartedness of Jews around the world who had nothing to fear, talking about what the Palestinians deserved and whether or not they had a right to live otherwise. And because I, like everyone on the planet, obsessed with what was happening in Gaza and could not stop looking at the numbers go up of the people killed, but I felt really helpless. There's nothing I could do about Gaza. But at the same time, I had known about the terrorism in the West Bank, but I started to follow it really, really closely. It got a lot worse after October 7th. It was bad before, but a lot of things changed on the ground there after October 7th. And I think partly because there was nothing I could do about Gaza, but there was a very obvious thing I could do about the West Bank. I wanted to get over there as quickly as possible. And actually, I booked flights 3 times after October 7th, and my flights kept getting canceled. So it like, I kept trying to go over to do protective presence, and I kept not being able to. And then finally, the first time that I was in Israel after October 7th, I did protective presence with a woman who was a friend of mine who had been Daphna Banai. You might know her. Everybody in the movement, or most of the people who've been doing it for any length of time, knows everybody else because it's such a small group of people. And I went with Daphna, who, like a lot of the veteran protective presence people, she goes with all of the groups. She'll just, like, will often just go with whoever needs somebody on the day that she's free. And from that experience, I learned how difficult it is to do it, and how I like, when Mitch got in touch with me, like, he had read the Avner Garayahu op-ed in Haaretz, and Mitch and I know each other because we're both writers and we've worked together on other things before. And he was saying, how do you do it? I was like, yeah, like, how do you do it? I mean, it's just hard to figure out how to do it. It's hard. It's really hard. I don't know how you would do it if you don't speak Hebrew and you don't know Israelis. Like, it's difficult. So one of the reasons that Mitch and I decided that we wanted to start the program is because, as Amit was saying, I don't believe that there is a moral way to be a Jew now without doing this. At least, if you have the capacity, I think you should. And if you don't have the capacity, then you should be talking about it and supporting the people who can go in whatever way is possible for you. Because, again, like, as Amit said, it makes a difference. It makes a real difference. And I'll go even further than Amit's examples and Moshe and Mitch's examples, because those are specific cases. But if every Jew in the diaspora, and definitely if every liberal Jew in America, would not shut up about this, policy changes would follow. And it's like a terrifying and really brutal fact of the world we live in, that American Jews have far more power over the fate of Palestinians than virtually any Palestinian does. But that is the truth. And since that's true, you have to do this, or you have to educate yourself about it. And that was, like, really just like a whip at my back ever since October 7th, when I, like, watching this genocide and watching and realizing, like, oh my God, the whole world's going to let this happen. And they're just going to keep doing it. And I had a Substack Live conversation with a woman inside Gaza and a Palestinian activist who's a friend of mine who's here this morning. And at the end of it, I asked the woman, her name is Wayam, she's an activist and a writer. She had mentioned that she feels that her duty is to make people understand what daily life in Gaza is like, because people really don't know. And at the end of the conversation, which was about the anti-Hamas protests, but at the end of the conversation, I asked her, what was your day like? And she said, I decided a couple weeks ago that I have no hope, and I don't think that anything will ever get better. My life is never going to get better. It's just, I have no idea where the water is going to come from. I have no idea where food is going to come from. I have no idea where I'm going to be. But when you get over there, and as Mitch said, like the poverty is terrifying. It's crushing poverty by design, and the hopelessness. So my story that I think about so often is from the overnight shift that I did in Duma, and I actually think that Michelle and I crossed paths. Like I think I relieved him of duty, but I got there when it was still dark. And we had all been warned, Mitch and I were warned together of the fact that you're gonna meet people and you're gonna form attachments to them and to their families and to the way they live, and they're gonna lose those homes, and that's just going to happen. And you might meet people and they'll care about them and you'll love them, and then they'll get killed. And I did this overnight shift with this guy who's such a sweet guy, so sweet, and this young guy is 23, and he has beautiful, beautiful daughter, and he was still at that point, he still had his home, and all he was doing in his home was keeping it. That was it. And that was success. We got there, and I was doing it overnight with a friend, but I was with Oded, who is another Torah Tzedek activist, and we were there overnight. Right before we went to sleep, settlers showed up with their ATVs. We ran out. They saw that we were there. They left. Bizarre experience, totally strange that these guys with M16s and their fancy little ATVs that Smotrich pays for, and that the Israeli government and the national budget is outfitted to give them, saw us and left. And then the next morning, Oded got a call while we were still there, and somebody was calling from Marjam about settlers who were encroaching on a Palestinian home. And he was like, listen, is it okay if I leave you here and go? And that's usually you're not supposed to do that because you're not supposed to leave anybody in the field by themselves. But I was like, yeah, just go. And I'm sitting in Riyadh's house in Duma, outside Duma, and it's me and 3 Palestinian men who are big guys. And I am not a big person. I am a small person. And these are large, tall men in their prime years. And the settlers, within 30 minutes of Oded leaving, the settlers came back. And I am one small woman, and I ran up, and these settlers in 2 ATVs saw me, and they drove away. And then 30 minutes later, they came back just to see if I was still there, I guess, because Oded had taken the car, so they thought that nobody was there anymore. And the same thing happened again. This time it was only 1 ATV. And when I came back, I was shaking because I was so angry. I was just so mad that my body, my Jewish body, was the thing protecting these enormous men from these little pishers with guns. It's just absolutely maddening. And one of the Palestinians, the guy with, I guess, the best English, saw that I was shaking, and he thought that I was afraid. And he said, don't worry, we'll protect you. And it was just that experience was there were so many things that happened in the space of a short amount of time that were so formative. But that sentence, because he meant it, what he meant was if they decided, because sometimes they decide that they will attack the activists. And what he meant was, if they decided that today was the day that they were going to attack you, we would protect you. And I know that that's true. And so I think that you don't get a lot of opportunities in life to test your mettle and really not test whether or not you believe that all people are equal, because you can believe that in theory and really believe it in a very different way after an experience like this. I feel like I proved it to myself, and that's a privilege too. So That's my story. That's who I am, and that's why I do this. And I think the only other thing that I would want to say on this episode is that our intention with these conversations is to talk to other people who do protective presence, but not just people who do protective presence, also people who can shed light on the context in which all of this is unfolding. So that's really what the purpose of this is.
Including Palestinians who will be on our show and speak about their experiences with activists and with settlers. Unfortunately, I want to add to Celeste's story that Riot's house is no longer standing, although the community of Marajam is still intact, so you can come and help them.
Yeah.